Okay, thank you. Can you all hear me? All right. I'm going to speak in English. I'm sorry I can't speak any German. And I'll try and say some things which some of you might think are very controversial. But I hope you will not think I'm a fascist or a card-carrying member of the Communist Party of China. I want to also say that I realize that this discussion that we're about to have might sound, in terms of a reaction from yourselves, one that is too far removed from what is happening in Germany. I think my intentions here are to try and perhaps connect what you see in Germany with what is happening in the rest of the world, and try and frame a discussion that we can have. One of the first things I like to say is that that coming from where I come from, which is essentially a city in China called Hong Kong, the view of the world looks very different. And I respect that the view in this part of the world is also very different. And therein lies the great challenge for our times. Now, yesterday when I was here, I was in a discussion with someone from India and someone from Moscow, and it was very interesting that the moment I mentioned the need for a strong state, everyone got emotional. Okay, but then I realized that in the short exchange of discussions, it was not easy to explain what I meant by a strong state. So immediately everyone thought I was against human rights, that I wanted to take away people's rights, etc., etc. Please, 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 I'm a Democrat, okay? But democracy and strong states are not mutually opposed. So this is a very important thing for us to understand. But neither is democracy the panacea for the world we live in. So I'd like to sort of look at first what I said yesterday, the reactions, and then yesterday night I had dinner with some German friends, and it's the same thing. The first reaction is, my God, look at, how can you say these things? It's terrible. You are against human rights, etc. So I'll try and shape that. So from about 1 year, 1 day, I like to go back 300 years. So if you could all switch your clocks and move back 300 years. Where we are today, particularly with relation to what we see as, and I don't want to talk about the environment, because the moment you just talk about the environment, then it's a very, very, in my view, very ideological, entrenched position. The Greens against the not-so-Greens, against the fascist economists, etc., etc. And I think we have a very silly conversation taking place around the world about the environment. So before I go back 300 years, let me just say that. We have very silly words called greening, and I know the Green Party here is very important. But these are all very, very public relations exercises. So I don't want to talk about greening. I want to talk about limiting. Again, I'm not a fascist. I want to talk about restricting. I want to talk about restraining. So 2 days ago, and I was in Salzburg, and I said, in most cities in Asia, we need more cars like I need a hole in my head. So we need to restrict car ownership. Now that flies in the face of rights. Now, if I say this in the USA, we have to restrict cars, they think I'm some kind of Al-Qaeda subversive. They might not let me out of Houston, okay? And even though I left my turban at the airport in Hong Kong, okay? So, you have to be careful, but the narrative is very ideological. So we have public relations. So we have greening. And my comparison would be that if we had a public relations industry, which we have today in the world, which is about $1 billion business, multi-billion-dollar business, if we had a public relations industry about 200 years ago when we had slaves, they would have called slaves migrant workers or guest workers, right? They would not have used the words correctly. That was public relations. A multi-billion-dollar public relations industry for decades tried to help big companies deny that there was climate change, fight every possible regulation on resource pricing, also pollution. So we need to call things more accurately and not this sort of public relations exercise. Unfortunately, politicians don't like it. So what do we have? We have corporate social responsibility for companies. This is an oxymoron, right? We have things called companies will make it sustainable. It is not to understand companies, to use the word sustainability. At the heart of the idea of sustainability is the idea of less. Companies don't do less. Companies do more. That is not to suggest that companies are bad things. We all need companies. We need companies to generate the electricity, etc. But to think that companies can deliver sustainability is just stupidity and a gross lie. But what companies can do is obey rules, the state. So, today in Germany, you have, I believe, a great mission to produce 1 million green cars, whatever that means, by 2020. Yes? Everybody know this? I think your great chancellor has made this the mission of the car companies to produce 1 million. Today, I think any Germans can tell me how many green cars you have in this great country today? No? You have less than 5,000. Less than 5,000. I'd be a bit more generous, okay? You have less than 5,000. This is the most advanced automotive country in the entire Western world. You have 5,000. I would bet $1 million there will not be 1 million green cars by 2010. Why? Because it's not in the interest of the car companies. And we can go into that. So you need but...
What do you mean by green card for Germany?
Sorry?
As a green card for the US we know, but what do you mean by green card for Germany?
I think in Germany it's considered hybrids as well as electric cars. Basically a combination. Yeah, that's a combination. But there's a spectrum of green, but broadly hybrids and electric. About 6 months, 3-4 months ago, I spoke to the management board of one of the largest car spare parts company in the world, which is a German company. And I said the same thing. You all know that we don't need more cars in Asia, yet you look at Asia as the biggest market. You're concerned about sustainability, but you will produce more cars. True or false? Privately, they all agree with me. They know we need, if you've been to any Asian city, you know it's a dump, right? Bad infrastructure, too many cars, all sorts of things. There's a few nice places, Singapore, strong government. There's a few nice places, but things work. But more or less, we don't need more cars. And they all agreed, but privately. But publicly, it's hard. So you can't ask companies to be sustainable. But you can ask companies to be more efficient. Yes? But they don't do it voluntarily. It's only rules that make them do it. Either international rules or the rules of the state. So I just want to put that out there in the rules of the state. I come to Berlin. Last night, I biked with some friends around Berlin. I felt very safe. Why? Because there's an underlying premise that my safety is assured in this city. Not because all the people say it's going to be safe, because there's an underlying premise that the state protects my safety. I flew into Berlin yesterday from Frankfurt. The aeroplanes fly on time, etc. Not because there are lots of NGOs operating all the systems, but because the state operates. I can post a letter from Hong Kong, though these days very few people write letters, but I still write letters. I can write a letter in Hong Kong and be sure that it will get to my friend in Nepal, because there's a postal service that is guaranteed and operated by the functionings of a state. All of these things are important. We take it for granted. So going from now 300 years back, I feel where we are today in terms of the financial crisis is the last death throes of an old person that has lived a very nice life, and that time is over. So let me go back. 300 years ago is essentially the initiation of colonial rule. I think the Germans can be proud they weren't too big colonialists. Only Namibia, I think?
China.
Sorry?
China.
A bit of China, yeah, okay. But, your track record's pretty good. So colonialism. And then there was slavery as well. What was all of this about? It was essentially a sense of entitlement towards resources to create prosperity. Yes? Much of the wealth, and I don't want to, involve in a blame game, much of the wealth in the West today is expropriated from other parts of the world. Okay, but we don't want to blame people. That's all part. But let's understand where that wealth came from. Clearly, there were advances in technology, etc., the Industrial Revolution, etc., which was generated out of the West. But that then propelled people to believe that they could have all the other things in the world. And so they took it. The US is essentially a new experiment in colonialism. 300 years old, Europeans went there, lots of resources. They said, let's populate it, let's get rid of the native population, also called genocide, but not in the history books, and let's do things very quickly. And so a big economy was created. But the heart of it was underpricing. Slaves to do the work, labor, and of course, free resources. So that was all okay for 200 years. And then we had the end of slavery because people thought having black people be treated like this is not good. So the end of slavery came about, and you all know there was lots of wars fought to end slavery. The idea that you could end slavery at that point was seen as ridiculous. Who would work? And cheaply. So that became an end. Then there was another 150 years of, 150 years of continuing to exploit resources through colonies, Africa, Asia, etc. That was then ended around 60, 70 years in different parts of the world. And after that, there was then no more colonies, no more slaves. It was then free markets. If you can push forward the ideology that somehow you can open up all your markets and we can have everything, the world will be a better place. So you had the pro-globalization movement, the free market ideology, and then we created financial markets to essentially live beyond your means, free again. So in America, for instance, which is extreme, but I'm exaggerating, you don't have to have enough money in your bank to buy a car. And what was the subprime mortgage which affected the whole world? It was essentially people with no money being told by banks, you can have a home. You can upgrade, even if you don't have enough money, because we will give you plastic money, and you can pay us some other time. So from breakdown of colonial systems right through to free markets, then we had subprime. The point I'm trying to make is the current problems we have from 2008 now is the last breath of that era of essentially exploitative entitlement and privilege and underpricing coming to an end. And we're in a new era. Why? Because about 30 years ago, this was not envisaged. 30 years ago, even someone like me, coming from Asia, but more privileged, though my background is not a privileged background, more privileged than the average, the majority of Asians, and luck plays a role in it. I don't think any of us thought Chinese and Indians would ever get rich. The image 30 years ago, and today everyone thinks, oh, the Chinese, they're all scared. They're not so scared of the Indians because they're Democrats, The Indians are okay. But the Chinese, my God, communists, nasty people, they're coming, okay? Actually, you got Chinese, Indians, Indonesians, Vietnamese all coming. Get used to it, okay? So 30 years ago, we never imagined this world. But we thought, if they're poor and if they're famine, but we'll not talk about the fact that we are externalizing all costs. If there's a famine and a flood, we'll all write a check and give it to NGOs, and we'll all send people there to help them. Do you notice whenever there's a famine in Africa, the first person speaking is usually a Westerner who went to help? You would think there were no Africans helping Africans.